Let me tell you a story from personal experience. In 2018, I was in my first year as a high school teacher, something I'd always wanted to do. But coming the spring of that year, I started having some health issues. Started having some pains we couldn't identify late February, all through March. Finally got into April, and finally, after multiple doctor's visits, emergency room visits, finally diagnosed that I had leukemia. And not only did I have leukemia, it turns out I had a very rare leukemia. So not only was I hospitalized, they put me on a helicopter and flew me to Little Rock, down to UAMS, where they have this leukemia center and they have a lot more experience with it. Further testing revealed I had a chromosomal disorder, which made it even more rare and made it very unlikely to stay in remission. So I ended up in the hospital most of 2018 from that point. April 19th, I was admitted, and I spent weeks in and weeks back home, weeks in having chemotherapy over and over until they could schedule a bone marrow transplant to cure the leukemia. So I was there about 4 weeks straight when they first diagnosed me. They said I would not have lived to the end of the school year, and this was late April when I was admitted. So I had it pretty bad, was deteriorating quickly. But about the second week that I was in the hospital, I'd been on chemo. I was starting to feel a little better, have some strength, kind of getting my clear head a little bit. My nurse came in that day around noon. My wife was out of the room. I think she went to get some lunch. And while he was checking the blood work or whatever he was doing at the time, he said, "Hey, I want to thank you for your humor." And I went, "Oh, it's no, I like joking around. I'm a funny guy. So yeah, you're welcome." And I kind of blew it off. So he finished whatever he was doing and he left. And my wife returned with lunch and we were sitting around. An hour or so later, he comes back in again. Some other nurse duty that needed taken care of. But while he was there, he stopped and he kind of touched my arm and he looked me in the eyes. He says, "No, I really want to thank you for your humor. In the morning when the doctors come around on rounds and you're joking around with the doctors, thank you for that." This time it really made me stop. And I really had to think about that. And of course, I told him he was welcome and, I was glad to provide some humor. And he left and my wife and I discussed that and talked about it. I said, "Why is it so important to him for me to understand how thankful he is for my humor? What must his day be like that it's so important that he thanks me for that?" And we got to talking about that. And I said, "The nurses must just have sadness and despair and anger and all those other emotions. That must be all they see all day, every day, because it's so unusual to have someone like me that's making jokes with the doctors and the nurses that he wants to make sure I understand how much he appreciates that." So at that point, we said, well, if that is the way it is, and it's that unique, we need to be intentional. So from that day forward, we said, we're going to make our room an oasis for the nurses. When they come in here, they're not going to see sadness and anger and despair because I'm just trying to get better. It doesn't help me to be mad about it, right? So from that point on, we got intentional to get to know the nurses. When they came in, "Hey, are you married? You have family?" All kinds of stuff. "What's going on in your life?" So it was really cool. Mark was the nurse that pointed this all out to me. Found out he was remodeling his bathroom. He's doing all the work himself. We were talking about the things he was installing, what he was changing in his bathroom. Really got to know Mark, what was going on. We had another nurse. I think her name was Teresa. She was planning her wedding. So we got to talk about all the things she was planning. When was her wedding going to be? What did she plan? And my wife really enjoyed that too, and talking with her and just kind of making those plans for a wedding. We had nurses that would come in when they had a break. They would come hang out in my room and visit with us, even if they were not the nurse that was assigned to me that day. Maybe they had other rooms that were assigned to them, but they had a break. They'd come hang out in our room just to visit, have some time instead of going to the break room. So we really were intentional and really made it our purpose to try to be different, to try to make our room take the load off of the nurses for their emotional day that they were having there. I think it really helped the nurses. They really smiled when they see us in the hallway, but I think it helped It helped us too. Because what it all boils down to is a lot of times you cannot change what happens to you. I got leukemia. It wasn't something I did. There's nothing I could have done to change that. The only thing I could change is how I respond to it. So stop and think about that. You can't always change what happens to you, but you can change how you respond. And responding one way can make it a lot easier to get through than responding another way. Something to think about.